Hello everybody, Stephanie here, aka Wolfpack, and welcome to my 4th edition of the book that I'm reading, Decked by Carol Higgins Clark. The reason why I haven't updated it in a while is because I was waiting to hear back from the author to make sure it was okay that I did this. I didn't think about it until about halfway in part 3. And I did email her. The email came back. And then she is on Facebook, so I just Facebook messengered. And maybe she doesn't go on Facebook a lot. I guess I don't know how else to reach her. So I have not heard back yet. So I'm just going to go ahead and continue. And hopefully maybe one day she will email or Facebook message me back, or maybe I'll figure out another way to reach her. But anyway, I hope you all enjoy this. This book is getting, as usual, it's in the middle of the book now, so it's getting better and better. And the mystery continues. So I hope you all enjoy. If you like this video, please remember to hit that like button down below. So that way I know that you guys are listening and watching it, or yeah, technically just listening. But you are going to watch me diamond paint in fast time. However, I know lots of people just want to, for some reason, hear my voice and read and hear the story. So I appreciate each and every one of you that is listening to this. Thank you so very much, and hopefully, hopefully next one will be next week. So take care. Thanks, guys. Bye. Oh, also enjoy.
Chapter 17. After dinner, Cameron Hardwick fled onto the deck. He had about all he could stand of Mario and Imicalia, oohing and eyeing over every bite of food or violin selection. He also had enough of Lily Exner waving that cigarette holder past his face. The ashes had landed in both his salad and soup before she finally put it down, and attacked her own dinner. He hoped that when the moment came to get rid of her, she'd have that holder and those butts in her pocket and they'd disappear with her. The night breeze was strong. A few people were walking arm in arm on the deck, but most women, Cameron noticed, turned back immediately when they felt the chilling draft. Don't want to get their hair mused, he thought, as he paused to fold his arms over the railing and study the dark water with the churning foam slapping the side of the ship. Then, from his left, he heard a now familiar voice. And Reagan, dear, no matter how brisk, on land or at sea, I never miss getting in my daily walk. Inhale that wonderful pungent scent. It bespeaks millenniums of tides rising and falling. I have always loved that poem. I must go down to the sea again. Veronica, I like to walk too, but let's run upstairs and get you a jacket. Look, here is dear Cameron Hardwick. Reagan, if you insist, go get my jacket. I'll wait with Cameron and we can chat. Hardwick felt a hand on his arm. With all the charm he could muster, he patted her freckled fingers. What a pleasant surprise! He wondered if Riley could read his mind. Even in the dark, he could see that she was studying him. I don't like to leave Lady Exner alone out here, she told him. Veronica, I really wish she'll be fine, Hardwick tried to sound reassuring. In fact, I think we should keep walking. We'll go to the bow and turn around. We'll stay on this side of the deck. Veronica's arm was now firmly planted in his. Such a strong man, she flirted. You're flattering me, Lady Exner, he said in what he hoped was a battering tone. But it's true. Dear Gilbert was a rather frail person, a giant intellect, but a distressingly troubled body. Run along, Reagan, she ordered. I'm well protected by dear Mr. Hardwick. Reagan reasoned to herself. He doesn't seem to mind. I'm only be gone for 5 minutes, and he's certainly capable of hanging on to her for that long. And if I don't get her a jacket, she'll end up on a respirator in sickbay. As long as it's no trouble, she said, and ducked back into the lounge. Such a dear girl and such a warrior, Veronica told him, as they began to move toward the bow. And such an interesting table we have. Dear Mr. Gavin has offered to escort me to the Sit and Be Fit session tomorrow morning. Dear Mr. Cahoon is going to give me some ideas for sprucing up Leolin Hall. He offered to stop by on his next London trip, which will be in September. I intend to ask dear Mr. Kenneth's advice about my hairdo. I've been wearing it like this for 4 years, and maybe it's time for a change. I'm afraid the couple may become a bit tiresome with their antics about their grandchildren, but probably on the return crossing I'll be a fountain of anecdotes about my nieces. I long to see them and make them part of the family. Philip, my nephew, is a sweet and practical darling, but a woman rather wants a daughter, don't you think? And while Philip's fiancée is a wonder, so efficient, so thoughtful, I have the feeling that I get on her nerves. But then, blood is thicker than water, isn't it? By now, they were the only two people on this side of the deck. It was dark. Lady Exner couldn't weigh more than 90 pounds. In an instant, he could push her into a daze to prevent an outcry, then toss her overboard. When Regan Riley came back, he would claim that Exner had gone in to use the ladies' room. Then he could get rid of her the same way. Who would suspect him? They just met. He came alone. Riley and Exner had come out onto the deck alone. Should he? Yes. The perfect opportunity didn't repeat itself. They were at the darkest point of the deck. Cameron drew back his free hand, and he heard footsteps. Across the bow from the starboard side of the ship, a couple was approaching. He could hear their voices before he saw their silhouettes. Nora, you're not dressed warmly enough. Let's go back inside. As they came closer, Hardwick saw that it was the same couple he had followed onto the ship this morning. When they saw him and Lady Exner standing at the rail, they turned wordlessly and retreated. The moment had passed. It had also caught Cameron that there was no way he could risk trying to get rid of Lady Exner and Regan Riley on a public deck. He would have to find another solution. Chapter 18. Veronica and Regan stopped at the small patio bar for a nightcap on their way back to the suite. I need a little something to chase the chill from my bones, dear Regan, and I think a nip of scotch would do the trick. Veronica grabbed seats surrounding the piano and grew misty-eyed as the tuxedo-clad musician played selections from Phantom of the Opera. Sir Gilbert would have loved that show, she whispered to Regan's ear. A half hour later, after Veronica had made several requests for I Love You Truly and Memory, they returned to their quarters, where the steward had already turned down the beds. The Arms and Morpheus should have plenty of room for both of us tonight. And since I haven't gotten any other offers, Mr. M will have to do. It was at that moment that Regan knew that Veronica had indeed succeeded in chasing the chill from her body. As Regan undressed and moved in and out of the bathroom, Veronica continued her monologue, undeterred by the sound of the faucet running. And do say a prayer for dear Gilbert. I must admit he was a bit of a Eggersnock? I have no idea. But he did make an unusual annual contribution to the Church of England and always sent the local minister a Christmas offering. Regan walked up the 3 steps to the living room area and gratefully got under the sheets in her own bed, wondering how Veronica had managed to learn so much about Sir Gilbert during their 2-week marriage. Veronica's prayers for Sir Gilbert must have been right to the point. About 30 seconds after her head hit the pillow, the snores began. As a snore pattern, it was rather unique, Regan found herself thinking. A short bark followed by a watery gurgle that reminded her she was due for a teeth cleaning. Regan hunched and twisted and tried to get herself into a comfortable position. These pillows are too thick, she thought, as she punched them with her fist. But they'd be perfect for Dad's clients, she mumbled as she laid back down, yet was still involuntarily propped up. Pulling them out from under her bed, she leaned them against her ears. encouraging herself in a tiny fort in an effort to dull the catastrophe emanating from the king-size bed. Usually she could drop off to sleep quickly, but tonight her mind refused to slow down. The first day was over, and she totally understood why Philip had insisted that Veronica must not travel alone. If Regan had not been there, Veronica would have plunged from the railing. For the next 4.5 days, until she delivered her to her niece, either Regan or someone she could trust would have to stick close to Veronica's side. Oddly, it was not so much the eventful day that she had just completed that was on her mind, but scenes from the weekend at Oxford, which kept insisting themselves into her thoughts. The way she and Kit had joked about Athena, her own belief that 10 years ago Athena had chosen not to come back to school. It was as though she could feel Athena's presence, hear Athena's rapid, emotion-charged, accented voice. I want to call Livingston, Regan thought, and find out if there's anything new. But it's too late to do it tonight. Crouched in a fetal position, Veronica slept the night away. For hours, Regan lay awake, staring wide-eyed at the terrace, watching the consistently evolving shadows as the ship guided through the Atlantic. She shut her eyes briefly, then opened them again and saw a shadow that resembled a human silhouette framed in the terrace door. She bolted up and felt her pulse leaping as her breath caught in her throat. In a split second, the moon removed from behind the clouds and the shadow disappeared. Regan shuddered. She, who was almost never nervous, had experienced an instant of pure terror. She swallowed quickly. Was that what it was like for Athena in the last minutes of her life? Tears strung her eyes. Who could have killed her? The local papers in Greece were undoubtedly having a field day with Athena's death, especially because it happened only 8 months after her aunt's murder. 2 members of a wealthy, prominent family dying violently was the stuff that sold papers. Maybe if I could read a transcript of what is being written in the Greek media, it might remind me of something I've overlooked, Regan thought suddenly. She decided that when she called Livingston in the morning, she would ask him to get a paper accounts from Greece translated and faxed to her on the ship. The prospect was comforting. At least it's a start. She finally fell into a troubled sleep in which, in her dreams, the creaks and groans of the ship were transformed into sounds of footsteps pursuing her. It was Veronica who awakened her at 8 a.m. Wake up, sleepyhead! Oh, how I wish I could sleep with the abandon of the young. I scarcely closed an eye all night. Regan opened her eyes to find Veronica already dressed in an orange and white striped jumpsuit with a matching headband. Oh, good Lord. Directly after breakfast, they have had the sit and be fit class. I can't wait to meet people in it. Hurry and get ready. We'll go down to the Lido deck for coffee and rolls. I don't want to waste a minute of this adventure. Regan showered quickly, her half-remembered dreams and churning thoughts about Athena foremost in her mind. She felt as though she were in a long corridor with many doors and didn't know which one to open. She wished she could talk it through with Jeff. Sometimes using him as a sounding board clarified her own thoughts. When she opened the bathroom door, she nearly ran into Veronica, who had been ready to pound on it. Don't take such long showers, Regan. It's very drying on your lovely young skin. And now, let's be off. Our public awaits us. Chapter 19. Tuesday, June 23rd. Gavin Gray did not enjoy a fuelsome night's sleep. Visions of a diamond and emerald bracelet danced in his dreams. When he recovered it and redeemed it, he would have at least $1 million, tax-free. Decidedly invested, that could mean an income of $90,000 a year. For that, he could rent a chateau and live like a king on the Costa del Sol in Spain, far away from the likes of Veronica Exeter and old Miss Watkins, Not to mention the buskies or whatever the heck their name was. He would never have to lay eyes on another bingo card ever again. At 6:30 a.m., as the sun filtered through the fog, Gavin got up, showered, dressed in his sweatsuit. He decided to go to the buffet breakfast by the pool. That way he could be sure to eat quickly. He needed several cups of strong coffee before he could face contorting himself like a monkey with Veronica Exner in the Sit and Be Fit class. It was a good decision. He carefully placed coffee, freshly squeezed orange juice, and a warm, flaky croissant onto a tray and carried it to the table near the railing. The breeze was cool, and the tangy scent of salt blew away the headache that had been threatened to develop. Looking out at the blue-green ocean with the flecks of white foam on the swells, Gavin found himself amazed again at the ship's aloneness. The vast plain of water that lapped at its sides stretched out for miles, undisturbed by any other signs of life. Sorry, Eli was chasing Gabby. Sorry. Gavin found himself amazed again. Oh, wait, I already read that. The vast plain of water that lapped at its sides stretched out for miles, undisturbed by any... I already read that too. Gavin took a sip of his juice. Hard to believe that right now, barges all over were probably dumping tons of garbage into its depths of the ocean. Well, that's sad. Fortified by his second cup of coffee, Gavin checked his watch. It was time to head for the lounge where the Sit and Be Fit class was to be held. His timing was perfect. Reagan Riley and Lady Exner were just entering the lounge from the opposite door. Gavin noticed that Lady Exner looked overwhelmingly bright-eyed, whereas Miss Riley looked as if she could use a little more sleep. After a hearty good morning, he took Lady Exner's arm possessively and dismissed Reagan with a wink, assuring her that all will be well. As the instructor clapped his hands and called, "Places, everyone!" Reagan exited the lounge. When she'd been in the shower, she made a quick call to Luke and Nora from the bathroom phone and knew they would be waiting for her in their cabin. Chapter 20. Nora and Luke were enjoying a leisurely breakfast in the sitting room of their suite. There was an extra place set. With a sigh of relief, Reagan sat down as Nora poured coffee into the waiting cup. Nora was wearing a pink silk robe, and Reagan thought appreciatively how good she looked without makeup. Luke was already dressed in a navy blue sweatsuit, which on him looked formal. Sorry, dang cats. The suite was decorated in tones of ivory and peach. The sun poured through the large portholes, and found herself began to relax. "I've got exactly 45 minutes before I collect Veronica," she announced. "How is it going, honey?" Nora asked with an amused expression. "This reminds me of going out on our first date, and then within 10 minutes you know you made a big mistake and are going in for a long evening. The problem seems to be that this first date is a 5-day duration," Luke volunteered. "Thanks, Dad. I thought you were in the business of offering comfort," Reagan yawned. "Veronica is a handful. She had a party for us this weekend that really turned into something unexpected. Do you remember my roommate, Athena, from St. Polycarp's? Black fingernails?" Nora remembered. "She eloped or something? The or something is that she was murdered," Reagan said, and as they listened, their expressions shocked. She scratched out the details of the discovery of Athena's body. "Superintendent Livingston asked me to try to remember anything Athena might have told me about plans to meet someone. I drew an absolute blank, but I'm going to get my journal out of the attic at home and see if it helps. And I also have another idea." Reagan told them about her plan to call Livingston and ask him to fax her newspaper accounts from Greece about Athena's death. "That's a smart move," Nora thought thoughtfully. "It's like an investigator picking up the file of an unsolved crime years later and seeing something he missed on the first go-around." Reagan placed the ship-to-shore call from their phone. As she waited for the connection to go through, she sat down on the love seat. "Let me know how much this costs. I just don't want it on Veronica's account." Nora and Luke both smiled. Sure, we'll bill you, Luke drawled. And inconsistently, you've had 2 cups of coffee, 1 orange juice, and half a bran muffin. Reagan was eyeing the clock nervously when the operator rang back to say that she had Superintendent Livingston on the line. Quickly, Reagan identified herself and explained her proposal regarding the Greek newspapers. I'll get them to you directly, the inspector told her. We can have them translated quickly, and possibly there's an English language newspaper in the area of the family home. We ourselves have come up with nothing helpful, but there is something else you should know. Miss Atwater had a narrow escape. She will recover, but traces of poison were found in her system. Penelope was poisoned? Reagan gripped the receiver, not believing what she just heard. But how? Livingston's tone became cautious. Apparently, she made a paste for biscuits to serve at Lady Exner's cocktail party. From what she tells us, she finished the last of the lot in her room Sunday night. The maid found a piece of one of them crumpled in her bed covers. Rather reminds of the one saying, "You can eat crackers in my bed any time." Oh dear. When the poison was found in her system, we immediately began an investigation, and were fortunate in that she's a bit of an untidy lady, I gather, and therefore the crumbs. Is it possible she made a mistake and put something in the paste herself? Reagan asked. Most people don't store arsenic on the pantry shelf, Livingston observed. Very odd, this whole business. I'll get any news clipping faxed to you straight away and certainly hope that they are helpful in jogging your memory. Reagan hung up. Hurriedly, she filled Luke and Nora in on what happened to Penelope, then said, I've got to get back. Gabby Gavin is bringing Veronica up to the suite, and then the boat drill starts in 15 minutes. As she darted out the door, Nora called after her, Reagan, I'm worried. Athena's body was found near the Exeter estate, and this Penelope woman was poisoned there? For God's sakes, be careful. Chapter 21. Tighten those buttocks and hold. And 1 and 2 and 3. Now release and 2 and 3. And squeeze and 2 and harder and release. Oh boy. Gavin looked around. These people could sit here from now till doomsday squeezing their bums, but they still won't end up in great shape. Sit and be fit. What a joke. It was like telling a couch potato he was building up his muscles by pushing the remote control with one hand and lifting a Twinkie into his mouth with the other. Oh, that's not exercise? No, I'm just joking. But from the looks on the faces of all the outsters surrounding Gavin, it was obvious that they thought something worthwhile was going on. Maybe it was all that squeezing. 45 minutes later, the young muscle man instructor yelled, Thank you all, as he clapped his hands enthusiastically. See you tomorrow, and watch out for all that fattening food they serve all day long. And have fun. Go out and get some of that sea air. I will, Veronica cried out. But first, we must all prepare for that boat drill. That proclamation having fallen on the ears of her fellow exercisers, who shook their heads in agreement and muttered, Oh, yes, right, that's right. Veronica jumped up to her feet. Gavin, I'll race you back to the suite. And in a shot, she was off. Gavin hoisted his not overweight yet not fit body out of the chair and ran after her. Veronica followed a zigzag path as her body veered starboard and then port and then back to starboard through the maze of corridors and staircases in tune with the crackling and leaning of the ship. Just as she was reaching the door, he caught her arm. Lady Exner, I have a tough time keeping up with you, he forced a laugh. This woman is going to put me in my grave, he thought. Either that or drive me crazy. Exercise releases endorphins, which give you a sense of well-being and energy, which begets energy. It's just like that smashing feeling of being in love that eating chocolate can recreate. Which reminds me, I've got to get a Mars bar, which I'll split with you. She smiled up at him. Maybe my ex-wife Clovis wasn't so bad after all, Gavin thought. As they entered the suite, Gavin's heart started to pound even harder. Maybe I'll have a chance to nab that bracelet, he thought. It was only Tuesday, but if the opportunity presented itself... Excuse me, but as the say at sea, I must use the head. Veronica blushed. Tittering, she shut the bathroom door. Gavin stood there, not believing his own luck. He looked around and spotted the small stool in front of the vanity in the bathroom area. This was his chance. That jumpsuit Lady Exner was wearing would probably take a few minutes to peel off and a couple more to yank back on. He hurried over, grabbed the stool, and with both hands and dashed up to the steps to the closet. Ha! It was natural for him to get the life preservers out for her. They were within easy reach, but he knew he would shove the bracelet so far back onto the top shelf he'd have to stand on something to get it. Which, of course, would look fishy even to the dingbat like Lady Exner. Opening the closet door, he was once again subject to the mean stare of the orange watering rings. I never should have thrown that bracelet on the top shelf, he thought angrily. He pulled the stool in closer and, carefully balancing himself, placed both feet on the cushion, usually reserved for the wealthy rumps. Grabbing the doorframe, he pulled himself up. At the same moment, the sound of the toilet flushing announced Lady Exeter's immediate return. He reached up and fumbled for the bracelet when the toilet whooshed again, and he heard Regan Riley's voice outside the door, chattering with the steward, as she placed her key in the lock. Not close enough to locate his hidden treasure, he jumped back down and frantically shut the door, ran over to the couch with the stool, dropped it, and stretched his left leg out on top. Regan, you're just in time. Mr. Gray is here to give us personal instructions for the boat drill. He is so kind. As Veronica walked up to the living room, she added, Oh dear, is there something wrong with your leg? I guess all that squeezing got to me. I seem to have aggravated an old hamstring injury I sustained when I was water skiing out in the Hamptons at a big celebrity party. I'll be fine. Regan wondered if this was a first. She couldn't imagine there were too many people besides Gabby Gavin who could walk away from the Sit Be Fit class in pain. We may as well get suited up, Regan said brightly. Let's get out those life jackets. Chapter 22. Cameron Hardwick was not pleased to see that Gavin Gray was at the same lifeboat station where he was assigned. Hardwick deliberately stayed at the edge of the group, bored with the nervous giggling of his fellow passengers as they tightened the straps on each other's life jackets and told story of people they knew who were on the ship that had to be evacuated. Some idiot started singing Nearer My God to Thee in honor of the Titanic, but finally shut up after a withering glance from the officer in charge, who droned on about emergency procedures. Gray was standing near the officer, and Hardwick had a good chance to study him. His eyes narrowed as he realized Gray was flushed as a nervous tick from jumping under his eye. Something really got to him, Hardwick thought, and wondered what it could be. This morning, Hardwick had observed Lady Exner and Regan Riley in the breakfast area from across the deck, and from a distance that followed them to the lounge. When it became clear that Gavin Gray was going to stick with Exner for the exercise class, he left. Now, as he continued to study Gray's distressed, tense face, his curiosity turned to annoyance. He knew what Gray was. One of those professional escort ships hired to dance with the old hens. But that job certainly didn't include Gray swinging his butt around in an exercise class. What was his big interest in Exner? And was he going to be another problem? Cameron decided it was time to get his hands on a key to Exner's suite and to the empty one across the hall. Quietly, he slipped away from the lifeboat station and into the lounge. As he hoped, it was deserted. Careful to be sure he wasn't being observed, he made his way to the stairs and up to the top deck. The silence when he reached it convinced him that the on-duty steward was at the drill. Hardwick walked noiselessly to the small room that served as the steward's station just down the hall and around the bend from Lady Exner's suite. The door was unlocked. He slipped in, his eyes darting from desk to chair to file cabinet to the wall panel that would light up for the room service. Cameron went through the desk drawers. There were somewhat untidy jumble of lists and regulations, paper clips and pens, crumbs and candy. The bottom drawer held a pint of Jack Daniels. Cameron lifted his eyebrows. A steward who embedded on duty was probably pretty careless. Hopefully, the night steward who likes to drink. He went to the file cabinet. As he hoped, it was unlocked. There were only about a dozen files, but in the last one he found what he was seeking. A key ring with 3 spare keys for the 2 suites. He helped himself to one of each of them. As he left the steward's station, he heard the whirl of the elevator. The staircase was at the end of the long corridor. He would not have time to get to it without being seen. With giant strides, he ran to the door of the unoccupied suite and let himself in. He was just closing it when he heard Lady Exner's high-pitched voice telling Regan Riley how perfectly thrilling the drill had been. Hardwick leaned against the door and let out a silent whistle. If Riley had seen him up here, alarms would have gone off in her head. He'd taken a chance, but feeling the keys in his hand made it worthwhile. The draperies were drawn, but it was possible to discern the layout of the suite. Carefully he studied it, and it undoubtedly was a mirror image of the one where Exner and Riley were staying. There were no places to hide. The only hope he had of getting to them would be to let himself into the suite in the middle of the night and use the surprise factor. It wouldn't be hard to take care of the old lady. It was Riley who might be a problem. He studied the sofa. It was obviously a convertible. This would be where Riley slept in the other suite. Even though she might be awake and hear him come in, with the element of surprise he could crack her head before she had time to call out or reach for the phone. From the sofa he could run back to the foyer. 8 seconds. That was all the time he needed. There was one problem. If blood spattered on the bed, no one would believe that 2 women had disappeared because Riley was trying to keep Exner from falling off the terrace. A pillow over their faces. No trace that way. In the duskness of the quiet penthouse, Cameron Hardwick smiled. The slow-acting knockout drops that had served him so well as casinos would be helpful again. They took a couple hours to take effect completely. It wouldn't be that hard to slip them an extra drink at dinner, or else he managed to join her and Riley for a nightcap in one of the lounges. It would be too much to drug them both. Riley would get suspicious if they both started fading at once. He had 4 nights to make it happen, but the last night, Friday, would be the safest. In the confusing of docking early Saturday morning, they wouldn't be missed immediately. The plan would work. He'd make sure it did. And next week he'd collect the $200,000 that was just waiting for him in a safe deposit box. Hardwick put his ear against the outside door of the suite and listened. He heard a faint buzzing sound, then the steward's voice. "Flowers for you, Lady Exner." He opened the door a crack. As the steward's back disappeared into the opposite suite, he hurried down the corridor to the stairs and back into anonymity of the public rooms. Chapter 24. As he approached Llewellyn Hall, Livingston drove slowly, envisioning Athena Populus riding down this quiet country lane on her bicycle, hoping to catch a glimpse of Philip Whitcomb. For the life of him, he could never fathom the taste of teenagers. In his wildest dreams, he could not imagine his 15-year-old daughter, Davna, having a crush on the likes of Philip. Gross me out, she'd say, her lip curled. But he admitted to himself even Philip would be a vast improvement over the prehistoric-looking creatures, so-called rock stars, whose likeness immortalized on posters graced every inch of wall space in Davna's room. Athena Populus had been last seen in the Bull and Bear pub near the train station. No witness had been able to say whether she was on the train, which of course did not prove she hadn't been on board. On Friday nights, dozens of Oxford students leave for London. They now knew that even if she had intended to take the train, the probability was that something had happened between the pub and the station. The gate to the Exner estate was open. Livingston turned into the oval driveway and parked in front of the manor house. He felt his senses quickening as he rang the bell. Nearly 48 hours ago he had come here to interrogate the classmates of the murdered Athena Populus. Lady Exner's companion, Penelope Atwater, had not known Athena. But around the time of his visit, an attempt had been made to poison her. Why? Was there a connection between the two crimes? And if so, what could it possibly be? The maid answered the door. Livingston remembered her name as he stepped into the foyer. Emma Roan. Rapidly he reviewed the information he had taken from her on Saturday. She worked afternoons at Llewellyn Hall and had done so for the past dozen years. Her aunt had been Sir Gilbert's housekeeper and later stayed on with Lady Exner until her retirement. That was when Emma Horn had taken over. Studying the woman's bone-thin face, Livingston detected a trace of wary humor in her expression. He decided that before he left, a trip to the kitchen for a chat with her would be in order. At his inquiry, Emma told him that Professor Whitcomb and Miss Twyler were on the back porch and were expecting him. The porch, like everything in the house, was in need of painting. The furniture consisted of an aging glider and matching rockers, with a rickety round glass table cluttered with stacks of newspapers. Val was leaning back in the glider, one pointed toe pushing the floor, causing it to sway uncertainly. She was wearing a khaki skirt and matching blouse, which somehow made Livingston think of a prim girl guide. Another organization his daughter refused to join. Her smile when she greeted him was polite rather than warm. On the other hand, Philip was visibly distressed. His sandy hair had a disheveled look, as though he had forgotten to comb it that morning. The knees of his light blue cotton trousers had traces of dirt, suggesting that he had been gardening. With his tongue, he kept moistening his lips of his even, fresh-featured, bland face. "I say, Inspector, I'm appalled." Livingston waited. "Penelope rang from the hospital after you left her. Surely the laboratory is mistaken. You can't seriously believe that someone tried to poison that woman. She's constantly experiencing stomach ailments." "Not of this magnitude," Livingston quietly. But for what possible reason?" Twyler's voice sounded disdainful. "It simply doesn't make sense." "Apparently not," Livingston said, "which is why, if there is a simple answer, I'd like to find it, since no one else became ill after eating the—" "Tasty pastries," Philip said helpfully. "Exactly. I certainly agree that Miss Atwater might have inadvertently added the wrong ingredient when she was preparing the treats, but since no one else became ill, it does suggest that the poisonous ingredient was added after she brought some 6 or 7 of them to her room as a nighttime snack. I wonder if I may look over her room." It seemed to Livingston that Philip's expression changed from distress to annoyance. "I thought the search your people made last evening was very thorough." Professor Whitcomb. "When we get a report from a hospital that poison was found in a patient's system, we must investigate most thoroughly. The laboratory confirmed this morning that the crackers found in her bed contained traces of arsenic. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to take a look for myself. Of course, of course. Philip opened the door and called for Emma. It was a bit of luck, Livingston decided, that neither Whitcomb nor Twyler chose to accompany him. He climbed the winding staircase to the second floor, puffing a bit at the effort. He observed that the aging carpet was threadbare, and sections of the wallpaper in the spacious hallway were completely missing. A proper mess this house has become, Emma said reprovingly. Herself has wanted to keep it the way it was when Sir Gilbert was alive, and Philip is just as bad. He doesn't notice that it is failing or down around him. At the top of the staircase she led the way to the right. All the bedrooms they use are in this wing. Lady Exner's is the first, then Philip's, a guest room after that, and at the end one is Penelope's. The door past that is the WC. The WC? Livingston exclaimed. Doesn't Lady Exner have a private bath? No, Emma said shortly as she led the way to Penelope's room. Anyone else would have converted one of these huge closets or maybe a guest room into a bath. But that what was good enough for Sir Gilbert isn't good enough for her. Doesn't really matter. She and Penelope share. There are 2 loos in the other wing and 2 on the main floor. But at this is the only working one. No, but at present. Her ladyship finally arranged to have the plumbing repair started, but it will be several months before the new fixtures are delivered. They were at the door of Penelope's bedroom. The bed had been remade. The luggage Penelope had planned to take on the trip was stacked in the corner. The top of the dresser was littered with odds and ends, making Livingston think of an abandoned gift shop. Scattered around the room were teddy bears of various shapes and sizes. The bed and the night table beside it were full view from the entrance. Livingston stepped back into the foyer. Are you saying that anyone who desired to use the WC on Sunday afternoon had to come up to this one? He pointed to the lavatory to the right of Penelope's room. Yes, sir. Ridiculous, isn't it? You must know how valuable this property is. A hotel chain has been after Lady Exner to sell even half of it. A fortune she could have made. Then she could do this place properly and enjoy it. Philip is just as bad. Him and his garden. I must say, however, he seems to be getting a little more aware of creature comforts as he gets older. Quite so, Livingston retraced his steps and walked down the foyer again as though he were headed for this WC. He realized that at the sight of an open door most people instantly glance into a room. That meant anyone here on Sunday who chose to use the facilities could have seen the purloined tasty pastries at Penelope's bedside. He inspected the room and returned downstairs, realizing he had established opportunity but certainly not motive. When Livingston rejoined Twyler and Whitcomb on the terrace, it was clear to him that they had been quarreling. Philip Whitcomb's nearly pale face was flushed. His forehead was furrowed, accentuating his seemingly permanent expression of bewildered scholar. Except, Livingston thought, he's now a very angry, bewildered scholar, or else is giving an excellent imitation of one. Livingston realized he did not know why that thought had risen unbidden from his subconscious. Valerie did not seem to be angry so much as forceful. She was leaning forward in her seat, her hands clasped, her eyes fixed unwaveringly onto Whitcomb's face. She did not seem to notice Livingston's return as she said, Philip, my dear, I know how distasteful and horrible this is for you, but you simply must admit that it is a distinct possibility, and rather than have Livingston look for a potential murderer, We must stop this nonsense in its tracks." "But Val, I say, it's so disloyal." Was it really possible that either one of them heard my footsteps? Livingston thought. He wondered if this exchange was for his benefit. But then maybe not. "I'm afraid I should have a heavier step," he said as they both looked up, their expressions now startled. "I cannot help overhearing what you said just now, and I must urgently suggest that if there is anything you know that can shed some light on this investigation, it is your duty to share it with me." "Philip." Twyla's hand reached over and patted his shoulder. "Oh, go ahead if you must, Inspector." Philip stood up and shoved his hands in his pockets. "This must be confidential. I mean, you certainly wouldn't press charges on an 80-year-old woman, would you?" An 80-year-old woman? Livingston could not keep the astonishment from his face. "Mm-hmm. Of course, to her it was a prank. I don't know. Philip, allow me." Val turned to Livingston. "Inspector, how much arsenic was found on those tasty pastries, and how much in Penelope's body?" "A trace?" Livingston said. "Very little, actually." "Certainly not enough to intentionally kill her." "Intentionally difficult to say. You must remember, Miss Atwater is an overweight woman who has not taken very good care of herself. She has a digestive problems, high blood pressure, an overworked heart, and a very high cholesterol count. She could easily have had a heart attack from extreme distress she was in, and in that case, whoever added arsenic to the tasty pastries could have been guilty of murder. Fortunately for that person, she is going to recover. Now, what do you want to tell me?" "Veronica, Lady Exner very much wanted to take this trip without Penelope. To be honest, Penelope has been getting on her nerves lately. They've traveled together a great deal recently, and while in some ways the companionship was welcome, in others it has begun to grate. As Penelope gets older, she eats more. Actually, she puts on 2 stones in the last 2 months. Veronica has said she sometimes thinks they should name a food processor after her. Last week, Veronica was out in the potting shed with Philip. He has a jar of arsenic clearly labeled, and Veronica commented that in the next time Penelope made tasty pastries, he might want to try mixing a trace of arsenic in them. That way, when she spent the night running to the loo and immediately flushing the toilet, at least she'd have a reason to be sick." "Surely you're not suggesting that she acted on her own witticism?" Philip broke in. "Val, I told you that it was a joke. Veronica wasn't serious." "I know she wasn't serious then, but Sunday morning, when Penelope went to church service, Veronica said that she was sure her niece would find it terribly difficult to have Penelope on her hands for a month. She again brought up sending Penelope off on her own holiday and going alone to the States. Philip wouldn't hear of it. Then when Penelope had to be rushed to the hospital, Veronica said something about how sorry she was. But doesn't life always have a silver lining to go with every cloud? Now she'll get her wish to travel without Penelope and not hurt her feelings." "Only you substituted Regan Riley as a companion," Livingston commented. "Yes," Philip said. "Actually, my aunt didn't mind that at all. She thinks Regan is quite fun, and of course when she gets to the States her cousin will take over. I've warned Regan that Veronica is very unpredictable, and she must watch her as one would a child." "But you see, Veronica gets her way," Val pointed out. "Yes, I see that." Livingston walked to the railing of the porch and looked out over the formal country garden. Amazing the amount of work that must go into these exquisitely laid out beds. Frankly, gardening bored the hell out of him. "A labor of love, clearly," Livingston commented. "We have 3 blooms a year," Philip said, coming to stand beside Livingston. "A great joy to work with one's hands, to feel the earth in your fingers, to see seedlings sprout." Livingston gazed at him, then followed Philip Whitcomb's gaze. He was not looking at the beds of flowers, but over them to the left, where the woods began, and from where there were faint sounds of construction. It was there that the skeletal remains of Athena had been uncovered. Philip, seeming to sense Livingston's calculated stare, turned restlessly. "I want a cup of tea," he declared. "Inspector?" It was not the most gracious invitation Livingston had ever received, but he quickly accepted and just as quickly noted the annoyed expression on Whitcomb's face. "I'll ask Emma to pour it." Val got up from the glider. Clearly she shared Philip's resentment at Livingston's continued presence. When she left the porch, Livingston, "Professor Whitcomb, there is something I must ask you, and I prefer to do it in Miss Twyler's absence. It has again been suggested that Athena had a schoolgirl crush attachment to you. I must ask you to be entirely frank with me. Did she ever in any way pursue you, perhaps to try to use you as a confidant?" Philip's face flushed. "Absolutely not. I simply wouldn't have any part of her." "Then she did try to single you out." Livingston said swiftly. "Oh, sorry." "She got in the habit of pedaling past here on Sundays afternoon when I was in the front garden. It was most annoying." "How frequently did she pedal by, and how often did she stop?" "Several times. I tried to get rid of her immediately. I was sorry for her. She was so obviously unhappy. I should have been stern with her." "Professor, please understand. My questions are simply directed to learning whether Athena may have confided it or tried to confide in you about an unhappy love affair or any problem that might help lead us to her killer." Philip bit his lip nervously. "Whenever she managed to corner me, it was to say she couldn't get over her aunt's death. Naturally, it was difficult not to listen to her. I told her she should get more involved with the other students, make friends she could confide in. When I stressed it was inappropriate to visit me outside St. Polycarp's, she simply showed up anyway. That happened off and on 5 or 6 times when I was working in the front garden on Sundays afternoons." "Then the last time you saw her was the Sunday before she disappeared." "Why didn't you simply tell me this on Saturday when Claire James said Athena had an attachment to you?" "Because I didn't have an attachment to her, and it was most embarrassing." "I'm afraid of embarrassment is not the issue in a murder case. Professor, if you could try to remember even one of your conversations with Athena in which she mentioned a name or plans she may have had, I'd be most grateful. Ah, here is Miss Twyler and Miss Horn with the tea. I'm afraid I really can't stay after all." Livingston gave his regrets to Val, aware that apologies were totally unnecessary. In the car, he hesitated at the end of the driveway as he weighed his options. He was anxious to see if the lab had any further results of forensic tests performed on Athena's body. He also wanted to pay a visit to the headmasters at St. Polycarp's. The headmaster won. Livingston had always felt that Reginald Crane was a man supremely equipped for his job. St. Polycarp's, after all, was 1 year or even 1 term school. Students came and went, some soaking in the cultural experience of studying in the Oxford community. Others, like Athena, were sent there under protest and never participated in town life around them. Reginald Crane was aware of the students' jokes about the narrow beds, thoroughbred blankets, and antiquated furniture. He dismissed the complaints. "Toughen up the spoiled kids," he had once confided in Livingston. "Budget's small enough. I'd rather spend it on offering them a wider variety of courses." A different man might have chafed under the endless change in the student body with the impossibility of creating any real esprit de corps such as a 4-year college engineered. and yet many former students did show up for their 10-year reunion. However informal it really was. When they came, they still joked about the faculties, yet seemed to be aware that their stay at St. Polycarp's had been, after all, a broadening experience. Crane had managed to gather together a superior staff of teachers, despite the relatively low pay. Livingston was ushered into Crane's private office, a wood-paneled room covered with bookshelves whose volumes tested to the scholarly mind of the headmaster. In his early 60s, Crane looked like a human thermometer, with his pale, pencil-thin body, ruddy complexion, and generous head of silver hair. Livingston apologized for the intrusion. "Don't like to simply burst in," he explained as he sat down in a reasonably comfortable chair near Crane's desk. In Livingston's 8 years in Oxford, he and Crane had become close friends. "You never burst in, Nigel," Crane told him. "You come without phoning because you're dealing with something that can't be put off." He leaned back in his wide leather chair and folded his long, suey hands. As my American students would say, "What's up?" Livingston decided to get to the point without preamble. "I want your honest, absolutely confidential opinion of Philip Whitcomb." Crane shrugged. "Absolutely confidential? Of course." "Then I have to say," Craig hesitated, "that it's hard to say. A good, even very good teacher knows his subject, loves it. The man is transformed when he discusses or reads poetry. Almost a visionary aura about him. Too much for my taste. After all, the poets were mere mortals. I doubt they read their own poetry with all the historics Phillips managed to contrive. But I do know he's made students whose idea of poetry was of the roses are red, violets are blue category, began to understand the concept of what makes a poem a classic. For that I am grateful, and students ought to be so. On the other hand, outside the classroom, I find him quite dull. Can't speak without blushing or stuttering, all wrapped up in his flower garden. I'm sure he'd rather plant flowers than eat. How he managed to get engaged to be married, I'll never know. I suspect Valerie did all the courting, not the other way around." "My impression exactly." Livingston weighed his next question, then asked it carefully. "If Philip is so persistent in class, does he have any problems with students falling in love with him?" Crane's face darkened. "Not anymore." "Not anymore?" Livingston pounced on the words. "What do you mean?" The headmaster obviously wished he had not been so blunt. "Perhaps I'm being unfair. After all, it was a long time ago. 11 years, as a matter of fact. Philip was still quite young then, in his early 30s, I should think. A student started following him around like a puppy. He was flattered, I gathered, and spent private time with her. Something absolutely forbidden. There must be no individual relationships between students and teachers at St. Polycarp's. Apparently, Apparently, Philip tired of the girl and started avoiding her. You can imagine how I felt when she burst into my office and announced she was carrying his baby." Livingston let out a soundless whistle. "Was she?" "No. She was highly emotional, even hysterical girl. Fortunately for us, she had made the same accusations about a teacher at a previous school. It wasn't hard to get the truth from her. Her relationship with Philip had been confined to some bike riding and picnics. Even so, it could have been a scandal, even a disaster for the school, if she had persisted in her accusations. I came within an inch of sacking Philip, but he pleaded for his job. You must realize that this position suits him exactly. He's teaching a subject he loves. He has acres and acres of property to garden, and he's obviously Lady Exner's heir." "I would suppose he is," Livingston agreed. I warned him most strongly that even if a hint of involvement with his student ever occurred again, he was out, and with a highly prejudicial reference. I see. You're quite sure that was 11 years ago. Very sure. I remember exactly because it was the year before that populist girl disappeared. At this time of the all of no, at the time of all the unfortunate publicity about the Greek girl who never returned to class, I kept thinking of how it would have been at the end of St. Polycarp's if 1 year before a student had become pregnant by a teacher, or even persisted in her claim that she was. As it is, I've been called several times this week by local papers asking for my comments on the discovery of Athena's body. The headmaster turned penetrating eyes on Livingston. I realize you can't disclose why you've asked me about Philip, but I hope you understand that I'm responsible for 500 students. Perhaps you should consider whether it is my responsibility to know what is going on. Livingston did not hesitate. There was no question Headmaster Crane had residual anger, even contempt for Philip, for the scandal he could have caused St. Polycarp's. Without proof, it was unfair even to suggest that he might have had any kind of relationship with Athena. For the moment, we are simply doing routine questioning. The headmaster's expression told Livingston that routine question was a feeble cover for purposeful investigation. For the second time that afternoon, Livingston left the meeting with the distinct impression that his absence was more honored than his presence. At headquarters, Livingston was informed that there were further developments in the populist case. The pockets of Athena's jacket had been lined with plastic. One of them had a hole on the inside. The forensic staff had found a matchbook from the Bull and Bear that had fallen through the hole, jammed deep into the lining of her coat. It had been well preserved. Scrawled inside the matchbook were two letters, B.A., and 300 and three numbers, 315. He went into his private office, settled at his desk, and wearily rubbed his head. Athena had been in the Bull and Bear on the night she disappeared. Did she write in a matchbook that night? Or had it been in her pocket for months? Were the letters someone's initials and meeting time? Was it part of a license plate? Somehow Livingston felt that this information was related to her disappearance and death. Chapter 23. Oxford. At headquarters in Oxford, Superintendent Livingston had been very glad to hear from Regan Riley so soon. After he said good-bye to her, he hung up the phone, swirled his chair around so that it faced the window, and leaned back, his favorite position when he was thinking. He approved of Regan's suggestion to obtain copies of the coverage of the deaths of Athena Populus from her hometown newspapers. The Populus's family's lawyer had made arrangements to have the body returned to Greece. Apparently the parents were in seclusion. Even though it had been more than 10 years since they had seen their daughter, they had always still clung to the hope that one day she would return. His review of the old file, as well as his conversations with the lawyer, made it obvious to him that the Populus's family was both affluent and influential. Undoubtedly, the discovery of the missing girl's body would be a major news in Athens and would receive extensive media coverage. Pushing back the irritation that acquiring the newspapers hadn't occurred to him first, Livingston again reached for the phone. When he left his office 15 minutes later, it was that of the assurance that copies of the paper reporting the Populus's case would be translated and faxed to him and to Regan Riley on the queer Guinevere. No, the Queen Guinevere. Good gracious. His first stop was a 5-minute drive away, to the bedside of Penelope Atwater in Royal Oxford Hospital. He braced himself for the rather nasty sight of Penelope. As he had seen her last night, her face ashen, her lips cracked and dry, variolous tubes attached to her roly-poly arms, a hospital shirt precariously close to revealing the unthinkable. All of this enveloped in a sneaky haze that left no doubt as to the condition of her innards. Maybe. After depositing his Renault in the car park, Livingston gulped in a precious few breaths of fresh air, then resolutely pushed through the revolving door into the nearly empty lobby. The janitor mopped up the tile floor, was using a dark green cleaning solution that never failed to make Nigel's eyes itch and little bumps appear in his already razor-burned neck. He hurried to the clerk in charge of the visitors' passes, who was wearing a red and white striped uniform and a badge which proclaimed to date that she had volunteered 10,000 hours to a Royal Oxford hospital. This is your life, Livingston thought as he asked for and received a pass to visit the ailing Penelope. Scratching his neck, he rushed to the lift. If I'd sat in that lobby for 10,000 hours, I've turned into a life-size hive, he thought. Penelope Atwater was in room 210. If possible, Livingston decided she looked worse today than she had last evening. As he drew up a chair to the bed, he felt genuinely remorseful that he had to question her. When she breathed in his direction, he also felt sorry for himself. He waited patiently in response to his inquiry about how she felt. She flooded him with precise, unwanted information. But, she croaked, at least I'm alive, which is more than I can say for my sweet old roommate. Livingston glanced at the striped bed under the window. I'd assumed she'd been discharged. In a matter of speaking, Penelope belched. Oh, beg your pardon. Yes, of course. Livingston turned to the business hand. Miss Atwater, I do hate to trouble you, but you seem to be absolutely sure there is no possibility that you might have mistakenly included arsenic as an ingredient into your order of divorce. I call them my tasty pastries, she quivered. Quite so. Now, if my notes are correct, you took the remaining, tasty pastries up to your room. That would suggest that since they all came from the same batch, if they had been completely eaten by the guest on either Saturday evening or Sunday morning, someone else would have gotten ill. The fact that only you became ill after bringing the leftovers to your room is rather odd. Livingston pulled out his notebook and flipped to the pages rapidly. You did not feel particularly well Saturday night, but recovered enough to enjoy more tasty pastries on Sunday afternoon as well as a normal dinner. Oh, yes, Adler's eyes brightened. For Sunday dinner, after you and the young ladies left, Lady Exner and Val and Philip and I enjoyed some bangers and mash. You see, Saturday night I had really just a touch of normal distress, which accompanies a delicate constitution. Sunday night was entirely different. It wasn't until I went up to my room and treated myself to the last of the tasty pastries on my bedside table that I became violently ill. Livingston looked up sharply. I understood that you brought the remaining tasty pastries up with you when you retired Sunday evening. Are you saying that you had left them in your room earlier? Penelope looked guilty. You see, they go over so well, and I was afraid the girls would eat them all up. So when I excused myself for a moment, I slipped 6 or 7 of them in a napkin and took them up to my room. So they were in your room for anybody to see most of the afternoon and evening? Finally, Penelope seemed to understand the drift of the question. Her eyes widened. Her mouth formed a circle. Her chubby hands clasped the hospital shirt. You mean someone might have sprinkled arsenic onto them while they were in my room? But who? And why? Livingston stood up. He patted her shoulder. That's what I intend to find out. As he left the hospital grounds, Livingston made a quick decision. A right turn would have started him toward Livingston Hall. A left turn led to the main street of Oxford and the King's Arms pub. He chose the latter, deciding that a quick sandwich and a cup of tea would be a very nice welcome before he met Philip Whitcomb, his fiancée Val Twyler, and the maid for further questioning. Philip had assured him that they would be at the hall all day. It was still early for lunch, and the pub was nearly empty. Livingston ordered a cheese and tomato sandwich and a pot of tea. The waiter had just served him when the front door opened and he heard his name being called. Claire James hurried to his table. Hi there, Inspector. What a surprise to see you. Oh, you having just what I was fixing to order. May I join you? She did not quite wait for his nod of assent as she slipped into the seat opposite him. Livingston had been hoping for a quiet lunch with a chance to think. But, on the other hand, he decided this young woman had been here at college with Athena Populus, and a chance to talk with her one-on-one just might be proved to be fruitful. He certainly could even use a glimmer of the new information, and besides, he admitted to himself, Claire James was very attractive in her spandex bicycling outfit. As she signaled for the waiter, Claire explained that she was just staying in Oxford for an extra couple of nights after reunion. It gets kind of boring after everybody else is gone, but my fiancé is meeting me here tomorrow, and then we're heading up to Scotland. I just love to travel. The waiter arrived. I'll just have what this handsome man is here is having. She smiled coyly at Livingston. That's settled. Claire leaned forward. Her attitude became conspiratorial. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Have you discovered yet who strangled poor Athena? Livingston tried not to sound annoyed. The investigation is still continuing. Well, I just bet that trail is mighty cold after 10 years. Who knows? Her killer might be dead by now. Claire widened her eyes, seemingly to enjoy the possibility. Livingston took a savage bite of the sandwich he wanted to savor. And I heard about poor Penelope. When I saw her stuff all those crackers in a napkin, I just knew she was going to get sick. Livingston's eyes narrowed. You saw her? Who could have missed her? She left a path of crumbs Hansel and Gretel would have envied. Livingston remembered that Hansel and Gretel had been lost in the forest because of the crumbs. No, because the birds had eaten those crumbs. What bird or vulture had followed Penelope's crumbs? Livingston chose his next words carefully. Trying to sound offhand, he said, Miss James, The other day you mentioned again that you thought Athena Populus had a romantic interest in Professor Philip Whitcomb. Of course, he violently denied it, and I noticed the other young ladies didn't seem to agree with you. What was the basis of your hunch? It's not just a hunch. When I was out bicycling today, I remembered bicycling with Athena. Just the Sunday before she disappeared, Athena and I went bicycling and ended up riding past Llewellyn Hall. As usual, Philip was out messing around with his flowers. Even though he had his own apartment at school, everyone knew that weekends you could always find him there. Athena stopped by to say hello. When I teased her later that she went down that road on purpose, she just turned all beet red. I just had a feeling that something was going on between those two. And thinking back, he wasn't surprised to see her. Didn't it occur to you to mention this 10 years ago? Heavens, no! Everyone thought Athena had just taken off on her own, and Philip certainly hadn't. He was still here, working away in the garden. Now that they found her body on the property next to Llewellyn Hall, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? It certainly does, Livingston thought as he called for the check. Despite her half-hearted protest, he paid for Claire's lunch. He decided that she had certainly earned her cheese and tomato sandwich.